Thank you. This is going to be difficult. There's water here. I'll probably knock it over before I'm through. First of all, it's a pleasure to be at the School of Advanced Research, although I keep making the mistake with the other one, or former title. And it's kind of neat to be here. Over half the audience are people that are friends of mine. And actually, on my last book, the one I'm going to talk about, some of you are in it. Now, Saul, I want to warn you, I overlooked you in favor of Pilgrim. Pilgrim was Saul's donkey that performed on the plaza for us when we did Las Posadas, until Pilgrim deserted us, ran off one night, and we had 2,000 people out there holding their candles, waiting for the procession to show up, and Pilgrim was running in the opposite direction with staff and Saul and family chasing Pilgrim, and so we fired Pilgrim from future performances, and some wag said, "Oh, I always knew the staff at the Palace of Governors, a bunch of jackasses," and so there we are. So what happened? This is kind of a difficult book for me to talk about in a sense, because these kinds of stories are in it, but there's also serious stories. It strikes me on a lot of occasions that people tend to lose their institutional history, how things came to be and who did what and how it happened, and just like magically, why is this building here, and who raised the money for it, and who designed it, and what were the problems and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of fun stuff that happens too. I've been fortunate in my life to have worked with a lot of very creative people, Pam Smiths and Orlando Romero and Charles Bennett and just Diana Ortega de Santos. And then when I went down to Albuquerque at the National Hispanic Culture Center, I met another great staff I inherited. Both staffs I inherited, incidentally. So that's kind of neat. It's like, Yogi Berra, who probably wasn't very smart, but he's managing the Yankees, so he's going to go to the World Series every year, and be a great wag and manager. So I inherited all these great staffs to do neat things. And on top of the staffs, we encountered and had a tremendous core of volunteers and friends and members of the public who came to our aid on numerous occasions through the years. So things like the History Museum down there didn't occur out of a vacuum. In fact, it occurred over many, many years. The first plan of that museum was done in 1982 at what I called a staff seminar. What I did was totally illegal, much to the chagrin of the other directors and the rest of the state system. On Fridays, I'd go around and collect $1 from all my staff and then go out and buy some beer and wine and chips and dip and soda pop. And we'd all meet in my little hovel of an office, which was about double the size of that little niche over there. And we'd all just squish in there before closing time, before 5 o'clock, and sit there and just kind of relax. And all our great ideas came out of that. And out of that came a master plan that said that we wanted to build a new history museum. We wanted to save the Palace of the Governors, because we were slowly deteriorating the Palace of the Governors by using it as a museum and constantly changing exhibits. So we had to stop hammering things into the wall to hang them. Can you imagine? Just that idea was almost earth-shattering. And then stop the different markets from pounding nails in the front of the building to hang their things, which created controversy. But that artifact, it is an artifact, is listed as artifact number 1 in the catalog books of the museum, as it should be. But we weren't taking care of it as we should have. So we decided, well, we need a new history museum, but we also need a new library, because the library at that time was in the old Armory building that's no longer there, and along with the photo archives. At the time, that library is still, I think, a great secret. There are books dating to the 16th century in that library. There are books that were hand-set with wood print in that library. And one of those books is one key reason why we got a $14 million appropriation to build the History Museum. And that was, Pete Domenici, at the time that we were trying to raise money we invited Pete Domenici to do a tour of what we were talking about, to see the library all squished in the armory, to see the collections down in the basement with all the pipes and the dripping water and the drain in the middle of the floor and all of this. But in the library, I had him set up volume 2 of Rumasio's Viaggi e Navigazioni. And what it was is a 1556 book. Right? And the book was open to the page that describes the expedition of Vasquez de Coronado. They're di Coronado, because he's, of course, Italian, because the book was printed in Venice, Italy. Now, 1556 is just, basically, it's 14 years after he got back from New Mexico at a time of great secrecy, because all these empires didn't want everybody to know what they were doing. And somehow, within 14 years in Italy, here's the whole story printed out, and published. And so we had that book there, and it was on a table with a little stand, and Pete Domenici came in, and I started explaining this book and that. We had some other books and led up to this one. And, you could see he's kind of like every politician, he's getting glossed over, who's who's this guy, he's wasting my time. We go do something important, like, discuss foreign policy or something. And then it says, and then there's this book. It was published in Venice, Italy in 1556. Got his attention. And I started telling him about it, and then I had the thing marked and opened it up to the page there, and I pointed out, the title there, and he looked at it. Now, Pete, after reform, can read Italian. So he looked at it and he says, "Can I touch it?" So we, really impressed him. We pulled out the white gloves, and made him put the gloves on. And he sat down in the chair there and just started turning the pages and looking at it and stuff. So then he says, "Oh, all right, you got me. You have to go to Washington and testify before the Senate Finance Committee. Right? And, can you bring some stuff?" And so Ambassador Frank Ortiz and I went. And see, it's not one person that does everything, not in my life at any rate. It's a lot of different people helping out and supporting. And we went, he stole his wife's fancy red hat box. And we had in it a 16th century morillon that was found in the lava fields out by Grant's. And so he says, "Now, if you tell Dolores that I took her box, I'll kill you." And I said, "That's fine, but I'm not carrying the box, you are." And so he had this red woman's hat box that he had to carry on the plane and then stick under the seat all the way to Washington. So we get to the committee. It was interesting. We met all our delegation. Now, we watch, the talking heads on television, and you just think because they're one party or the other, they hate each other. And maybe that's true in certain cases, but when it comes to their state, they kind of unite together. And so we had Republicans and Democrats there, and every one of them, we went to every one of their offices. They knew we were coming. They met with us. Then we went before the Senate Finance Committee. Pete Domenici was chair of the committee. The Republicans were in the majority at that time. The minority chair was, guess who? Huh? No, Bingaman, Jeff Bingaman. So here's these two New Mexicans who are, chairing both parties on the Senate Finance Committee. And we did our presentation. We showed them our stuff and everything. And then Pete asked, "Is there any objections to this?" And right away a hand goes up. Here comes this kind of, wizened guy. He looks very dignified, and he represents the National Park Service. And he says, "I've been sent here to oppose this legislation. We have no wiggle room in our budget to be given $14 million to a state." And Pete says, where are you getting your information? And he says, "Well, my boss told me this," the head of the National Park Service at the time. And he said, Pete says, "You understand that this money will be new money appropriated through your department, not taken from your department. Do you understand that?" "Well, yes, but we still have a problem with federal government funding a state museum." And so Pete says, have you been to Santa Fe?" And the guy says, "Well, yes." He says, "Have you seen the collections in the State History Museum there at the Palace of the Governors?" And the guy said, "Well, I don't remember." And he said, well, have you seen what was presented here? And he said, well, yes. And he said, would you agree that they represent more than a state's patrimony? Well, yes. And so then Bingaman raises his hand and says, my friend from New Mexico, you know how they do that. And Bingaman he's turned to a page in the bill and he says, sir, could you turn to page so-and-so, section such and such, and he reads something. And he says, do you understand what that means? And the guy just had no idea. And then Bingaman goes to another page and does the same thing to him. No idea. So then he yields back to Domenici, who now has the bill, and he's open to a page, and he says, I want to point this out in the bill. Are your bosses aware of this? And, well, I can't speak to that. Well, by the time they finished with the guy, he was like, he was on the floor with blood running out of the side of his mouth, and so we passed. And the one thing we did request of him, once we knew it got past the Senate Finance Committee, we were going to get through the Senate, was we still needed over $30 million. At that time, the budget was $32 million. When I left the museum, we had raised something like $36 million in total. There were a number of things and pieces to put together, and it started with the library, actually buying the old city library to become the new Fray Angelico Chávez library. The story of that's in there. Dealing with Mayor Sam Pick at the time, who wanted to sell it to a gallery owner to be a new gallery. And then we I believe this or not, we threatened eminent domain. And that was with the help of a number of attorneys in the foundation who did that. And once that, without doing it, it's for the public good, and I'm biased, as a museum person and historian. I think history is good for the public domain, sometimes more so than a highway. And I'm sure every archaeologist I ever met would argue that point. And so when we threatened that, we were able to buy it at appraised value, and got a state appropriation for that. So there was a number of pieces that had to fit in place. And so we asked Domenici if the legislation could be a matched legislation, that we, just don't give us the money, but make it matched, that the state had to match it, or with public funds, we had to match it over 10 years. And that's because we're a poor state. The state legislature, outside of maybe a basketball arena or something, is not going to give you $14 million just willy-nilly. And so, we figured, well, we could do it in a series of sessions. And that's sort of what happened. We matched the $14 million through the state over a series of sessions. Gary Johnson became governor, and Gary Johnson, if he was nothing else, he was very honest with me. He just point blank said, Tom, I really don't care about what you do. I appreciated that. I mean, some of these guys look at you and say, yeah, we're all for you, man, I'm with you. And then, before you know it, the rug's pulled out from under you. But no, he was very honest about it. And so we went 3 times to get the last of the legislation. And the first time, he vetoed it. The second time, on his recommendation, it went through as a bond, and then it was put into something like driveways for state representative bond issue, and without mentioning us. So we lost that bond. When the people voted on it, why are they going to driveways for state legislators? You got to be kidding me. And so we lost that. So the third time we went through again, it was his last year. So the session ends, as you all know, in March, in the long sessions. And he only has a few more months in office. By then, he announced he was going to climb Mount Everest when he got out. And I'm at a reception up at the governor's mansion. And any of you know Gary, you know that he was very shy. In a crowd, he just didn't know how to work crowds or anything. He's just a shy guy, and that's fine. And so and people didn't know what to say to him anyways, just because of who he was. And so here he is in his own place, in the big dining area there that most of you have been in, I'm sure. And he's standing in the middle of the room and nobody's talking to him. They're all like a high school prom around the walls waiting who's going to start, You go, no, you go. I don't want to go, you go. And so I walked up to him, and he knew me by then on a first name basis. And he says, hi, Tom, how's things going? I said, fine, Gary, our governor, I always, defer. And says, are you training to climb Mount Everest? And he says, no, I'm just, I go hiking in Hyde Park. And I says, Governor, that's not Mount Everest. You're going to kill yourself if you don't do this. Tom, the worst thing in the world is preparing for the accomplishment. It's like, so he didn't want to really train, although he ran a lot, but he was at, elevation. I mean, he's going up. So I actually thought he's going to kill himself going up Everest. So then, my moment came, and I sprung it on him. So, Governor, are you going to let our legislation pass for the museum? And he looks down on me because he's a lot taller, and he says, Tom, I have a lot of things on the plate coming at me, and we got to, you got to eat the main course before you can get to the dessert. Yeah, all the air goes out. And so I looked right up at him and says, Governor, I grew up in a large family, and we always learned to eat our dessert first to make sure we had room for the rest. And he just laughed at that. Well, the headlines read when he finally, it wasn't about all the other stuff that passed, it was the museum, the Palace of the Governors gets funded. And so we got it, and so it was done. Kind of a neat little thing that happened. I want to read just a little bit from the front, because when I was doing this, and the germ of the idea came when I was leaving the Palace of the Governors. Over the years, I was doing these lecture series. Some of you attended, I know, and they were fundraisers because I didn't have the money. I was asking people to give money, going out and asking my friends donate to this and that, and I don't have the money to donate. I was, taking the alms from the state, the vows of poverty as a historian, and so I figured out I could use my mouth to raise money, and it turned out that over, I don't know how many years I did it, but every year, January, February, I would do a lecture series of 6 lectures and invite, von Ludwig Duck, Herr Professor von Ludwig Duck, my lifelong nemesis, would show up on occasion and criticize me, and just have fun with it and share New Mexico history as I knew it, and now have forgotten it. And then people paid for that. And over the years, we averaged something like 82 or 83 people a night who paid $15 to be at that thing, and we raised somewhere around $110,000 just at lecture series, which is a really great credit to this town. I can tell you from experience, if you try that in Albuquerque, it's not going to happen. So I dance that way. I just stepped on her foot. and so she discreetly pulled it back, like I wouldn't notice it. It's okay, I'm used to it. My wife is too. So when I announced that I was going to retire from the Palace of the Governors, rather than do the 5 or 6 nights of lectures, I decided to do, the mother of all lectures. We advertised it, just 5 hours of me in front of a group talking New Mexico history without repeating myself or leaving the stage. And so, that night we raised $11,000 that night. At La Fonda gave us the room for free. Sam Balin did that. Thank you, Sam. And so when I was doing that, during the course of that, I mentioned to the audience that sometimes we people who work in the arts and culture and teach, especially our teachers, sometimes feel like we're Don Quixotes chasing windmills. Where's the benefit? Where's the rewards and stuff? I mean, even when you listen to on a national level, people talk about education. They're talking about science and math, but never the humanitarians, right? The historians or the archaeologists or the English majors or the musicians and the artists. And so, and that's the museum world, the world that I've grown up in, and it's my life. As a historian. And so, it's like, but I always knew and always believed in it, because it is my religion in that sense, that there are benefits to it. That everything we do, if we stop and think about it, it's like throwing a rock out into the pond and watching the concentric circles just go out and affect all kinds of people in ways we don't even know. And some of you have been involved with me with some of this stuff, and you understand what I'm talking about. We do this thing, and it just it starts having positive effects on people. I wanted my staff, most of whom are still around and with me, and the friends that helped, to understand that they were appreciated, and the benefits that they did may not have seemed like much then, but now it's a lot. When you go downtown and see that museum and see the programs, when you see that it has an endowment, when we started with nothing, and the foundation said, well, if you can raise $20,000, we'll give you an account. And we did that. We raised $68,000 in 6 months, and so we started our account. And the lecture series was part of that. And now, they have, I don't know how many millions in their endowment there now, but that's because my staff sacrificed to do that. Instead of taking money from the foundation to do programs, they always took 11. We started by getting 14,000 back then from the foundation for programs, and it grew over the years. But we'd always put 11,000 of it into the endowment account every year, and that's meant the staff, all my friends who had all these ideas for great programs, sacrificed their programs for future generations. It's a kind of a neat thing to do. And now, they can sit back and say, yeah, we did that, but did anybody remember they did it? Right. So that was the idea of the book. And so the book's called Chasing History, Quixotic Dreams for Artifacts, Art, and Heritage. And it's modeled on Don Quixote, on the book of Don Quixote. And if you know Don Quixote's book, who here has read Don Quixote?
How about parts?
All right, I'll accept parts. Okay, I have parts. Yeah, everybody should read Don Quixote. It's my favorite. When people ask me what's my favorite novel, it's Don Quixote, because I keep referring back to it and thinking about it. And you always hear people refer to Don Quixote in some way or another, if you're not familiar with it, it's actually 2 books in one, because he wrote it in 2 stages. But it's written in very short chapters. The case of the escaped lion or something, make it up, or the windmills or whatever. And so I modeled the book on that, and where'd I put my glasses? Yes. And divided it into sections rather than 2 books. But you'll get an idea just from the sections that I keep referring back to Don Quixote. First section, part 1, it's called Don Quixote and the Cultural Crusade. And then there's little chapters that are 3 and 4 and 5 pages, in which history is defined and the chase begins, in which the pursuit of collections is described, on how the Secular paintings returned home. I'm going to remember that, right? She has a question for me later. Then the second section, Dulcinea, which was Don Quixote's imagined girlfriend. She'd never really existed, but in his mind, he did, and Sancho Panza, led him to believe it too. Dulcinea does not exist, and then it is how there's deception and stuff that we do, and how things happen, in which is revealed that Santa Fe is older than commonly thought, and its founder discovered. Some of you were around for the story of the Martinez papers that we found that established that Santa Fe, actually there was a village here, and it was established by this guy Martinez, captain under Oñate, as early as 1607, even though the city council doesn't want to change its symbol from 1610. Well, that's fine, but I put it in here again and did the whole story with a little more information that was dug up. Incidentally, all these stories are footnoted too. So I think I would exaggerate or something. I wouldn't do that, no. And then the story of the Mordion and the breastplate. Now, how would the museum get a 16th century Mordion that probably belonged to some of the first settlers, Spanish settlers in this country? Pedro Ortiz had it under his bed. And it was given to him by a friend who found it in the lava flows. And late in life, the poor guy was, destitute. And we overpaid him for it. Good. And we did it on purpose. Because he wanted it to come to the museum, but he couldn't, It just would have, to me, it would have been immoral to just take a donation from him. And he was a great man that most of you don't even know. Some of you remember him, but most of you don't. And so, in a way, we enriched the collections because, as the commercial says, the value now is priceless, and we helped an elderly man at a time when he needed it. So that story's in there. There's the story here, in which is, some of you are familiar with this one, regarding the sorry tale of Peruvian art and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. There's been a lot of false information put out there. You'll have fun with that one. Part 3, the value of Sancho's hindsight. Now, in Don Quixote, Sancho Pancho always talks in dichos, but he's very intelligent and insightful the whole time. But he's always talking that way to the point where Don Quixote is telling him to please stop it. driving them nuts with it. And Sancho, of course, answers him with another dicho. But his hindsight is amazing. And then so here is the tale of, there's a award-winning print shop at the Palace of the Governors. Just got another couple of big awards. I know Saul's even had a book printed there and done. But how did that happen? Who started that?
Padre Martinez, wasn't it?
Pam Smith.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Padre Martinez never worked at the Palace of the Governors. Yeah, he had the first press. Pam Smith, well, what's her story? How did she come to the museum, and how did that all start? And then that plugs into earlier print artists in the city here. And so, that story is in there too. And it involved a predecessor of mine, Mike Weber, who had the foresight to get the initial collection of the printing press and stuff from a printing house down in Moriarty. And so all that stuff is here. The next section, every windmill is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah. First chapter, 5 pages, about an old man, a fantastic photograph, and a love story. Third chapter in that one, in which the Smithsonian Institution and Library of Congress learn about cowboys. I'll tell you that story in a second if you remind me. How Christmas came to the palace. Saul was the original Jose, and that, along with his donkey. But we kept Saul and fired the donkey, and his daughter was Mary. In which a photograph proves a controversial point. How many of you were here when we were having the fight over having a marker for the Japanese internment camp? The mayor's, the city council split its vote to have that or not, and then the mayor cast the deciding vote. But what was the turning point of that whole controversy? It was a photograph that we found of a Japanese soldier in the 442nd that went to Italy and fought Germans, the most decorated unit in the army, was brought home to attend the funeral of his dad who had died in that camp. And so here's this photograph of the casket and all the interns arrayed around it, and one man right behind it in a U.S. Army uniform. So I had it published in the Journal and the New Mexican, and I think that's what turned the event. It was a very controversial thing, and for reason, because after all, we are the home of the Bataan Death March people, and they have definite and serious feelings and true feelings. I have no bone to pick with them about what they went through and how, what's resulted to them. And so this was kind of a thing that we had to, work our way through. But as a historian, it's something that we had to talk about and know about. And so that story is in here in detail about the city council and then all this stuff. For one of the grandsons of one of the marchers was looking to punch me out, and didn't do it, but couldn't find me. I can survive. I know how to survive. And then the last section, the joust is for real. And the first chapter on the meaning of ta 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 ta. Well, the ta 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 is the sound of a helicopter coming towards you. And I'll tell you that story right now. We had hired a director of the Museum of New Mexico named Jean Weber, who was from back east someplace, maybe even Canada, as I recall. She came from a museum in New York, though, and she never quite adapted to New Mexico. And then we had a governor who was looking to hire New Mexicans, and that would be Tony Anaya. And then he started leaning a little bit on the director, and so then the staff split because some of the staff wasn't behind the director either, but other staff was wearing little buttons, Saver and stuff. And we were at a board meeting down at the State Monument in Coronado, and the board called a recess, and so we all went outside, and here comes this helicopter, ta, 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 ta. and we're looking at it, we're just enjoying the scenery, this beautiful view, looking at the Sandias, and the helicopter comes closer, and by God, it's coming to us, and then it lands there in this hail of rock and stone in the parking lot, and out jumps Tony Anaya and does a V-line right to the boardroom and tells the chairman that he wants to reconvene the board over a personnel matter, and then everybody goes in except for staff, of course, and all the visitors, and somebody says, I wonder what that's about, and my reply was, say goodbye to Gene Weber. And that's exactly what happened. And so our lives, the joust is for real. We do have to deal with the reality of politics and the public and everything. And here's the story from my point of view and my involvement with the controversy over the Virgin of Guadalupe and how that happened and what went on in there. All that stuff was real. It's stuff we have to deal with and deal with reality. Even though, we are artistes, we have to deal with it. So that's how it's organized. Now I want to start off with kind of setting how and what I felt about it all. In the beginning, in the preface. 4 centuries ago, Miguel de Cervantes, a wounded veteran, impoverished and realized and released from a debtor's prison, wrote 2 books that became one. His own attempt to create and leave something for the benefit of society must have at times felt like he and not his novel's main character was chasing fictional giants who turned out to be windmills. That feeling, along with his book, has prevailed through the centuries. Cervantes' classic satirical novel, Don Quixote, became one of the most popular novels of all time. In fact, it is the most popular novel of all time still. Even today, it continues to teach and entertain. Many sensitive minds, writers, artists, teachers, creators, philosophers, etc., who are cultural crusaders, have wondered why they do what they do. Nonetheless, they continue to struggle with a single purpose of mind, that what they are about is important now and in the future. Now, then I found this interesting story about here in New Mexico. About 100 years, almost 100 years ago, Frank Springer, a prominent attorney, amateur scientist, and community activist, spoke at the dedication of the new Museum of Fine Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In the museum's St. Francis Auditorium, he said, quote, "It is when the doers and the dreamers work hand in hand, or better still, when the dreamer is himself a doer, that epoch-making events are achieved." He didn't name himself, nor did he name anybody else, but he was talking about people like Edgar Lee Hewitt, who was involved here, as well as the Museum of New Mexico. He was talking about Ralph Emerson Twitchell, Charles Loomis, Alice Fletcher, Jesse Newsbaum, John McPhee, Kenneth Chapman, L. Bradford Prince, and any hundreds of others you can probably bring to mind if you just looked and thought about it. These same people were instrumental in preserving the 1610 Palace of the Governors. There was a time when there was a move to demolish the thing, just get it out of the way. Not with people like this here. And they created the Museum of Fine Arts across the street. They created the School of American Research back then. And because of the effort of the Museum in New Mexico was established, and soon after the Museum of Fine Arts and all this, and generally Springer's words applied to every person who's had the fortitude and persistence to accomplish the seemingly impossible. I think back to Edgar Lee Hewitt, thinking about, well, let's create a museum, back then in territorial New Mexico. That must have seemed impossible, yet he persisted. Those people, Springer continued, had the duty to keep the lights of human intelligence and creativity burning brightly. Well, that's what I thought. That struck me. That's what my staff and the people who worked with me did in their generation. And it struck me that, someday somebody's going to wonder, who did that? What society supported this? How did it happen? Right? How did the Segesser paintings get here? I'm not asking you yet. You're supposed to be in the back row. Oh, professor. So how does this stuff happen? Who's going to be the doer and who's going to be the dreamer? Now think of it, we're in my little crowded, cramped office on Friday afternoons at 4 o'clock to 6 or 7, depending on how long the libations lasted. And, we're not talking about where we're not getting paid enough or any of that stuff. We're talking about, man, what can we do? What can we do? I remember Ruben Romero, whom I hired late in his life because he was on the down and outs, and I made him a receptionist at the Palace of the Governors. And, the guy, he died from a drug overdose in the end. But he sat in there and he says, he looked at us because he knew he was just there for a little while, given his personality. And he says, you guys are so lucky to have these jobs doing this, working here. You need to realize that. Of course, he was speaking to the choir because we were already saying, yeah, we're going to build a museum. We're going to buy the city library next door. We're going to try to get the property back of it that belongs to a private family. We're going to build a new museum. And what are we going to do with the administration that's there? Well, we're going to have to build a building for them. Guess where it is? Up on the hill now. And that was all that money we started raising. We're going to create an endowment for ourselves. And everybody says, yeah, no, endowment. History museum? Boring. Right? History? Boring. We're going to do that. And we're going to be aggressive about our collections. Because up until then, the palace's collections were leaving it and going to other museums. And we're going to be aggressive. We're going to keep what we have and get more. So we got the Martinez de Montoya papers, and we got the Segasser paintings. We got the Mordion. We started doing that. And how are we going to get to them? How are we going to get them engage the public? We had our first meeting of friends at Mary Jean Cook's house up on the hill. And our second meeting at Anita Thomas's house. And we formed a support group, which was unheard of in the museum system at the time. It was just the foundation and IFAF, the Folk Art Foundation. And the head of the foundation, Helmuth Naumer, said, you can't do that to me. So I told my friends, why don't you go see Helmuth and tell him, accept us or we'll form our own foundation, which they could do legally. And so then they became a committee of the foundation. Of course, Helmuth would come to all the meetings and make sure we weren't doing any kind of, sly stuff. And then we said we wanted to raise an endowment. Well, you got to raise $20,000. Thinking we couldn't do it. We did. And what was really neat, it worked so well for the foundation that the other museums were allowed to form these groups because it turns out people generally want to contribute to what they like and not generally, some do generally. I prefer generally for myself because I understand from an operating point of view how that works. But some don't. Some want to just want to support fine art. Some want to just support Indian art or folk art. Some want to support history, believe it or not, or archaeology. So rather than sit there and poor boy, we're just historians and nobody likes us, let's find out. And we found out. It's kind of a neat thing. And so those things started happening. I went down to the National Hispanic Culture Center, which is, after I announced my retirement, they came and it was kind of neat because, I'm not very tall. It felt like I was being recruited to the basketball team or something, They called me up right away. First of all, Adrian Bustamante was the acting director down there. So he called me and said, Tom, why don't you take my place? I said, I'm retiring. Then I get a call from, Ed Lujan shows up in my office, who's chairman of the board down there. He said, we want you to come down and be the director. Then Edson Way, who is the Secretary for Cultural Affairs, called me, Tom, you're the perfect choice. So, and I'm telling her, I got to talk to my wife about this. She's kind of anxious to see me retire, because I'm a little older than she is. And, she doesn't want to be wheeling me around too much. And they, Ed Lujan almost cried in my office, pleading with me. And so finally I accepted. And the last day at the palace was a Friday. My first day at the cultural center was a Monday, and I inherited this whole staff. They were $6.2 million short of the Roy E. Disney Center down there, and I found out that they were naming it the Roy E. Disney. Now, Roy E. Disney's the nephew of Walt Disney, the son of his brother Roy, so he's Roy Jr., the one that I dealt with. And he was the only one of the Disney family that kept up the business and stayed in and ended up fighting with Eisner over control of the whole Disney thing. And he would fly into Albuquerque in a 737 jet painted green with a shamrock on it because he called his foundation Shamrock Foundation or something because of his wife Patricia, who is Irish. And they somehow thought that he was going to contribute $10 million to the National Hispanic Culture Center, so they were going to do a whole naming opportunity with him and have a big celebration. And here they got all the, built the stand and put up the banners and had everything all set up and the big reception to make the announcement. And he stood up and announced he's pleased to give $1 million over the next 5 years. Get the whole building named. First of all, they needed the money now because the construction was going on. There's a money flow thing going on. You got to pay the guys working. And so then they let it go. They said, well, we'll just raise the money when they couldn't raise the money. So I got to call them up and say, there's a movie out now about Walt Disney and Mary Poppins. Yeah, it's kind of interesting movie because, Roy looked just like Walt. And actually, I got to go to that office, where Walt Disney always started his programs in there, and it's still the same with Roy. It was really kind of neat, because I grew up with that. But what was neat about the movie is Walt's telling everybody, just call me Walt. And at one point he says, Walt is an old man, or Mr. Disney's an old man someplace. I'm Walt. Roy did the same thing. Imagine me, I'm all humbled to meet Roy Disney, and Mr. Disney. I mean, we met him at the private part of the airport when he got out of his 737 with his wife and a dude carrying his briefcase. And he said, pleased to meet you, Mr. Disney. So, call me Roy. Roy's for some old man, or Mr. Disney, some old man someplace. And so it was always Roy and me, right? So I got to tell Roy that, it's kind of ridiculous for us to name a whole big new performing art center after you for just $1 million. And this, it isn't even as easy as I am telling you, because what happened was the foundation person didn't want to do it, because I was lambasting her and says, nah, man, the guy's laughing at us. $1 million, getting a whole performing arts center named for him? That's crazy. He knows better than that. He was involved in the fundraising of the center in Los Angeles. So he knows better than that. In fact, because of him, I got a behind-the-scene tour of the center in Los Angeles. And so he said, well, then you do it, smart ass. That's the exact quote. And so, and to make sure that I did it, she dialed his secretary right in front of me and said, here, So, and his secretary, and I'm misusing the term, the person that answered the phone always was not the secretary that sits there outside his office and greets you and provides you with a cup of coffee while you wait or something. This was this strong-armed bully of a lady, mean-spirited, and she was the self-anointed protectress of Roy Disney. Actually came out to Albuquerque a couple of times with him. And I said, well, I'd like to talk to Roy. And said, anything you say to Roy, you can say to me. So I said, well, Roy needs to give us more money. In fact, if he doesn't give us more money, the auditorium is not going to open when he thinks it's going to open because there's a money flow problem. And then, she went off on me like you wouldn't believe, talking about you people. I think he's referring to all you New Mexicans, not me. You people are always like that. I told Roy not to deal with you people, and you people was just rubbing me wrong. You people. Man, oh man, have you met any of my friends? You people. This is Alan. And so I sent I got off the phone and I wrote a letter directly to Roy. I had his address, and I said, listen, I had this uncomfortable call with your protectress who kept referring to this, and so I'm telling you right now, the auditorium's not going to open. There's not enough money. I don't think that you've donated enough to have it named for you, and there's a problem with the timing of the money coming to us. Now, there was another little problem. I won't name the name of the guy because he's still around, but there was a guy that grew up in the Disney family with Roy and started filming the animal shows that they did, the nature shows, and then was a little bit in Roy moved over to the cartoons, but this guy kept as a filmer. He was from New Mexico and retired in New Mexico, and he was the guy that got Roy connected with the National Hispanic Culture Center. And he convinced my predecessors in the foundation down there that all the money that Roy was given, not all of it, but a great majority of the money was to go to him on a salary as the advisor to the cultural center. So we're getting this money that's supposed to be building a building that's going to get named after him, and we're paying this guy like $8,000 a week. You know, and I said, well, who are you working for? And he said, well, I'm supposed to be advising you. I said, well, why don't you come and have an office here so I can, you can advise me. I'll know where you are. And he wouldn't do it. You know, I said, well, why don't you, coordinate with the founder? He wouldn't do it. So I put in there in the letter and says, by the way, Roy, your donation is not benefiting us getting that building built because it's all going to this guy. Well, the letter goes out. And about a month later, maybe 3 weeks, I get a call at my house here in Santa Fe from Roy's briefcase carrier attorney, accountant. And he says, Tom, I have your letter to Roy here. He's read it. He's in Europe right now with Patricia, and he wanted me to call and talk to you. I said, okay, good. Where do you want to start? He said, well, let's start with the protectress. And he says, I understand and know what you're talking about. I said, good, then it's forgotten, but I don't want to deal with her anymore. He says, that's not a problem, but no more complaints about her? So I don't have to deal with her, there's nothing to complain about, right? And he says, yep, okay, good. He says, now tell me about the financial stuff. And I said, well, and I explained the guy's getting like $8,000 a week. And he says, that's the other thing. I asked the foundation to look and see if there was any kind of contract with this guy. Nothing. So it's, true New Mexico employment. He's going out the door, And so they said, no, that's not our understanding, but I'll double check with Roy. And sure enough, later, he did double check, call me back within days, says, no, Roy didn't want that money to go to him. So we cut him off, which, of course, made him very mad, but too bad. Still in town. Actually, Bill Richardson hired him from one of his higher-up positions and kept him for a little while before he fired him. I won't say anything about the governor. And so that was taken care of. Then he says, well, what about the money? He says, listen, here's where we are. We have a bunch of people sitting on the toilet down here who are willing to contribute, but they're waiting to see, it's kind of who's going to go first thing. And you've given us, up to that point, they had given us like, 250,000 out of the first million, and the rest was going to come over the next 3.5 years or so. I said, can we telescope this stuff and get it up front? Because we need the money now. We need to, if you want the building open next April and we're in November, we need the money now. We can't be paying for it, 2 years from now. And he says, well, let me check with Roy on that. And so the other thing is we need at least another $1 million from you. This isn't going to work. And they did it. They did it. Roy, without hesitating, basically I can just hear him, sitting there saying, I was wondering when they're going to wake up, and he did it. So then I find out, because he came for the opening of the museum, and it was still delayed, or the auditoriums, and it was still delayed, and we had this grand Maravilla opening, and we invited all these guests from all over the country to come and perform and stuff, and it was really kind of neat and grand and glorious, and Roy was there. And I found out that he was involved with Salvador Dali. And this is something some art museum should latch on to, because it's unfinished business. There's always unfinished business. Salvador Dali was in Los Angeles working for Disney at one point in his life. No. Yes. And he was creating a cartoon, an animated cartoon. And all his artwork is still there in the vaults of Disney, the Disney company. Roy rediscovered all that, and he finished the cartoon. It was nominated for an Oscar as a short, and because the timing was just right, I asked Roy, he was going to be at our opening anyway, he says, well, why don't we preview it at our opening in our new auditorium, and then you can be there and talk about it. And he did it. So he was really happy with me. I'm rolling now. See, did it again. It's not you. and so I had this brilliant idea, because I've never had anything less, that with this, if you've been in the auditorium, it's a state-of-the-art auditorium. It's the most technically advanced auditorium in the state, in fact. But it's not a big one. It's 680 seats, so it's an intimate, incredibly technically advanced auditorium. In fact, I did a sound test where I went to the last row on the balcony and closed my eyes and had a staff drop a pin, and I could hear it. You know, it was kind of fun watching the sound people with their computers doing stuff to test it when they were, you know, finally building the thing. So, we like opera in New Mexico. We do. It's big business in New Mexico even. And we kind of like things Hispanic in New Mexico. Some of us. So why not combine the two and make the new auditorium in Albuquerque the National Center for Zarzuelas, Spanish operettas? We even engaged Placido Domingo to maybe help us raise money for it. But he wanted to see if we were serious, if we could get started. You know, Placido Domingo started in zarzuelas. He even has an album of zarzuela songs. And so I found out in this opening weekend that Patty Disney, she went by Patty, not Patricia, Patty is a zarzuela fan. Put it together, right? So Roy's up on the stage in between all the activities. The local press is interviewing him because he's somewhat of a celebrity, and at the time the fight was going on with Eisner and stuff, so they're asking him about that, and he's telling them, stay tuned, we're getting it back, and he did. He got the company back. And so he finishes it, and he's still sitting up there and taking the microphones off. I won't do it, but taking them off, and I said, hey, Roy, I have an idea for you. And he says, what? He says, Patty likes zarzuelas. Oh, she loves zarzuelas. He says, I want to make this a National Center for Zarzuelas. How about we do a Patty Disney series every year? Do 2 zarzuelas to start with for 5 years. You pay for one of the zarzuelas for the first 5 years, and we internally somehow will raise the money for the other zarzuela. And he goes, oh, don't tell Patty, I want to tell her. So right there, you know, I go back and sit down. He takes off his microphone. He's still on the stage. He calls Patty up to him, leans over, whispers in her ear, and she squeals in delight. So for the first 5 years, they had zarzuelas set up, although I left and they kind of let it fade, and there are no more zarzuelas there. But it still can happen, right? It still can happen. So those kinds of things went on and happened, and I'm running out of time, and I'm going to end with the end of the book. The largest festival celebrating Cervantes in the world takes place in Guanajuato, Mexico. Believe it or not. It's kind of neat. And it's actually my favorite festival, and I've been in a few of them now, you know, the Feria in Sevilla and Semana Santa in Sevilla and different, and Zozobra, of course, you know, Fiestas de Santa Fe, I've been to that, and the markets here. And it's really it goes on a month. Don't do that because you'll kill yourself. Go down there for a week or 5 days for the Cervantine, the Festival Cervantine, as they call it. But they feature some part of the world every year, and that means food and music. They invite all these world-class. I saw the French National Ballet Company the year I was there, performing in their beautiful old opera house that they now use for other things. But they have street stuff that's free. Then they have stuff in all the churches and at the university, which is right in the middle of the town. It's just wonderful event to go see. So the book ends with there because I kind of saw the irony of all that. Take the marker out. I write these closing lines in Guanajuato, Mexico, as I sit at an outdoor restaurant and bar. Bar is very important. I'm just being honest there, you know. In front of the Hotel Luna that faces the Jardines de Unión. The plaza is pretty as any. Underneath the well-manicured trees that completely shade the plaza, life bustles in every direction. The plaza is full, and so are the city's streets for Celia, my wife, and I have come to enjoy the Festival Internacional Cervantino, an international celebration of Miguel Cervantes. I think about the sense of symmetry that Cervantes would appreciate, for here I am attending the festival celebrating him, and the festival's location is in America, a place to which he wanted to travel but was refused permission to do so. Centuries after his death, I'm finishing a tome that in many ways was inspired by his own classic work. Hopefully, to paraphrase Don Quixote, my words have not plummeted from the peaks of my simplicity to the depths of my ignorance. Rather, they will continue and boast the lifelong quest of myself and many others, both in these pages and beyond. I remember speaking about Fray Angelico Chavez, that one time called himself a true cousin of Don Quixote. I said that years from now, people will remember him, but they will have no idea who the governors were during his life. People remember Cervantes, and not necessarily who his king was. Indeed, Cervantes' protagonists, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, are more famous than most kings throughout history. The general public can tell you who Shakespeare is, but do not concern themselves much about who ruled the government under which he lived. But then there are warrior leaders. Carlos III of Spain created the Prado Museum. Teddy Roosevelt, President of the United States, created national parks. Maybe there is immortality for some crusaders. So surrounded by music, art, literature, and history that cannot be escaped in Guanajuato, I scribbled the last lines of this self-indulgent effort, the latest of thrusts at the windmills of our time. Vale. Vale is the word that Quixote ends the novel. So that's my 45 minutes. Before you ask, I'm gonna share this with you. I shared it with, were you at the last one where I shared it? Still haven't heard, but I'm waiting. The Segasur paintings, which I was involved with a lot of other people, I couldn't have done it by myself, bringing those paintings here, although some people would say that's just not true. I didn't pay for them, for one. You know, and actually, I want to give credit to somebody who just passed away for helping get the money, Max Cole, in the legislature. And I want to say this too, and I've said this early and often, I'm the first to poke fun at our state's politicians, or any politician for that matter, but I still believe that this state per capita spends more in culture and history and art than any other state in the union. All you have to do is look at all the state systems, state monuments, the granting agencies that the state funds for arts and the humanities, the New Mexico Humanities Council, the Arts Board, just all that stuff. You know, some of you who've been here a long time marvel, you know, your friends come here and they marvel that we have all these museums in this little itty bitty town. And I don't know if you spend much time in Albuquerque, but you'd marvel at what they have going there too. That's pretty amazing stuff. So, you know, while I pick on them, I appreciate them. I always thought it was easier to go to the state legislature and read the newspaper endlessly while I was waiting for my turn before a committee. It was easier to do that than to write a grant. Actually, the hit percentage was better with the legislature than my writing of grants. Might have been because I was sending them in with purple crayon on brown paper. I'm not sure, but that might have been the thing. So here's the story. You know the Segasur paintings came. If you're familiar with the Segasur paintings, you better become familiar because they are special. They are unique to New Mexico and this country, this continent. But they're still not altogether there. We know that Father Felipe von Segasur sent 3 paintings to Europe. We still haven't found one. It's out floating around, we hope, someplace, but hopefully not destroyed. But it could have had the fate of what was becoming of Segasur I. They're named Segasur I and II. Segasur I was being cut up over the years. There was a doorway section taken out when it was pasted to the wall or nailed to the wall in the Segasur family castle in Eberkron, Switzerland. And that we know, we did the research to find out that it was given to an architect friend of the family. And since then, the descendants of that architect, this was back in the 1890s, 1892 if you want an exact date, you know, they've lost track of it, so it's gone somewhere. I'm sure it's framed and hanging somewhere in Switzerland, you know, and people have no idea what it is or where it came from. And so maybe someday that will surface. And then on the other side, down the painting, or if you're looking at it this way, there's a 30-inch wide, 4.5-foot section that was cut out and is missing. So if you look at that painting, you see the doorway piece missing, that's obvious. And then you see 2 strips at the far end. Well, that big, thick piece goes before those 2 strips. And it depicts, and we had a 1960 photograph of it. And what it depicts is that the teepee Indian village that is being attacked in the main body of the painting. and the teepees, doors, face the viewer. So you can look in there and see their pottery or basketry. And the ethno-historians love that because it helps them identify the tribe. We knew that it existed in 1960. While we were buying the paintings, we were buying the paintings from Andre von Segesser, who had them. He had inherited them down, through generations. When word got out that he was selling them to us, another part of the family, one of his cousins, Ludwig von Segesser, decided to form a family trust and go to court and sue Andre, saying that the paintings were the family's and not his. He lost that suit. But as a result of the suit, I think, it was only right and just that we also go to another court in Switzerland, their patrimony court. So the paintings couldn't leave the country unless the patrimony court agreed to the thing, and they did. They agreed that they've taken so much from the colonies, they should give something back. It's actually quoted in those documents in German are at the history library down there. There's whole files of this stuff. And so we won that, and so they came here. Well, Ludwig remained bitter that he didn't get to cash in on the paintings, although we bought them for $400,000 in the end, when the original asking price was $2.2 million. But that's what good look and quick wit get you, tuck them down. And in 395,000 of that came from the state legislature. Think about that, state legislature buying art, huh? See, it's all possible. Right? And the governor approved it. And that was Governor Carruthers. And there's a whole story there, sidetrack, and it's in the book. At the time, the Secretary for Cultural Affairs didn't like the Segesser paintings, and he let everybody know that. And he did his best to block us from getting those paintings. So we went around them and got the legislature to, write up the legislation, approve the bill. Les Houston, who was a senator then, he was kind of he was our power broker then, very, very conservative senator, and we went to him because we figured he would be the one that would lead the opposition, being a very, very conservative person. One of our operatives met him on a plane, on an airplane, and started talking about the paintings, and Les told him, so you better be telling me the truth. And he said, I am. And so he said, well, have Dr. Chavez call me. So I called up Les Houston. Les Houston said, get your Uncle Fabian to get the bill written up and I'll sponsor it. Well, Les Houston had formed a coalition of all the Republicans and some Democrats, and so he was the power broker there dealing in the legislature. We had a new governor, Gary Carruthers, come in. Les had formed his power under Anaya, and so we got the thing passed. Well, the Secretary for Cultural Affairs, who was that same guy who became the museum or the foundation director, Helmut Naumer, was just incensed that we did that. We didn't go through him, and he didn't want it. And frankly, he cared more about Georgia O'Keeffe than any Hyde paintings and so on and so forth. And so he advised the governor to veto the thing. Just line item it out. We're going to lose it. And so I got a smug phone call from Helmut Naumer, and some of you know who he was. He had this kind of resonant, deep voice, and he liked to use that to intimidate short people. Except for one. I at one time told him, I can pump gas and be a historian, so don't try. And so he says, Tom, you need to meet me in the governor's office. He wants to talk to you. So, so I go trudging over. But we had done a seminar, a symposium with the Segesser paintings, sponsored by the New Mexico Humanity Council. And they won a national award for that seminar that we did on the Segesser paintings. And they had printed a poster of one of the paintings. And so I rolled up a poster to take, I don't know why I thought of that. Just when I was leaving the office, I'll give the governor a poster, And so we went up. Helmut's there at the first floor waiting for me and going up the elevator, and he's just so smug, and walk into the governor's office, and there's Gary Carruthers behind his desk, and Helmut says, Governor Chavez is here. I mean, he had trouble with the doctor part with me, and so we go in, and Carruthers stands up, and I said, well, Governor, before we start, I want to give you this poster. And I rolled this thing out on his desk, and he looks at it and says, oh, those are those Hyde paintings. We have to have those. End of meeting. And it was a quiet elevator ride back down, too. And so we got the paintings. What he didn't know, what Helmuth didn't know, was the governor's wife, who was a very decent lady. And one reason why Gary's never run for governor again, actually, when he was considering it, even when this last time, she doesn't want to go through that again. But she was very active on the Humanities Council. So she knew all about them. And so I'm sure the governor knew about them too. And so, you know, we dodged a bullet there as well. So that's how we got the painting. So now, I tell people, when you retire in Spanish, it's jubilar, jubilate. And so I'm jubilating. I'm having more fun now than I ever did, and I haven't stopped. And that includes the Segesser paintings. I'm in correspondence with Andre's son, who is an international attorney, comes into Santa Fe occasionally. We get together, have dinner. He has his law firm in Zurich and San Francisco and I think New York and something. And I did a book, one of them's not up here, just an anthology, just published an anthology on the Segesser paintings. And George Segesser was the one who found the photograph of Gottfried Holtz, who wrote the first book about the paintings. No one's ever seen a photograph of the guy, what he looked like or anything. So I asked George if he could go to his old museum and see if they had in their files, and he did, and he found a photo. So that book has a photograph, the only published photograph of Gottfried Holtz, who's the key to the whole thing of the Segesser paintings. He deserves that credit. And he also deserves, and I write about it here, his research at the time was poo-pooed by we New Mexicans because he wasn't a New Mexican. How could he know about hide paintings, our paintings? You know, only we know about that. And he was pretty much right on. The man deserves a lot of credit for being a Swiss ethnohistorian and coming here and talking about our history and our hide paintings and our art. And he did a lot of sound research. And so I published that. Well, then the Segesser book got published right before this book, Chasing History. And Chasing History has the story of how we got the paintings. And I sent them to George Segesser. I says, George, this is about your dad and your mom and all their involvement in all this. And he says, I think it'd be a good idea to give it to some of my cousins, the sons of Andre. Andre's since gone to the great whatever in the sky that the Swiss go to. Maybe because they have now the missing piece. Wow. And what happened was, when we went to court and the publicity came out that these paintings are going back to New Mexico, a private person, unbeknown to anybody in the Segesser family, said, oh, I have one of the pieces of those. And that's the teepee piece. And so Andre and George raced to this guy's house. Now, these guys are both mid-80s and beyond at the time. Racing to the house, Andre and Ludwig. And Ludwig beat Andre and got the painting. I wrote a letter to Ludwig saying, and actually, I negotiated the paintings without having any money, so what the heck, it's easy to negotiate when you have nothing. And I said, we'll buy it for $25,000. And he wrote me back, no, in fact, send the rest of the paintings back here. So I figured I might outlast him and just wait. And George and I have been waiting. And he's left the legacy to his one son, and his one son now has both of these books that talk about the Segesser paintings and the family. And it looks like that they're willing, according to George, to negotiate. Yay! So we'll see. So, the quest continues.